Hello, my name is Audrey Emrine Beardsley. I'm a professor at Arizona State University, and I am in charge of a show called Inside the Academy, during which we interview icons in the field of education. And today I have the pleasure and honor of interviewing Dr. Richard Anderson here at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Thank you so much for being interviewed today.
Thank you.
We're going to start with the first part of the show is called Becoming Richard. So where were you born, and tell us about your family and your childhood?
All right, well, I was born in a farming town in western Wisconsin, River Falls, Wisconsin. It was about 2,800 people when I was growing up there. My dad was a country doctor, and he was a very good one, much admired by his patients. He was an osteopath rather than an MD. And one of the memorable, maybe I could even say pivotal times of my childhood was when there was a fight over whether my dad would be able to send his patients to the little local hospital. So it was long, drawn out. I was smarting with indignation that the MDs would try to keep my dad out of the hospital, and I suppose I developed some sympathy for the underdog, some feeling of social justice from that experience.
Oh, fabulous. And what about your mom?
My mom was a stay-at-home mom and housewife. She, like my father, grew up in small-town America. She grew up in a little town of 400 in western Iowa, and met my dad in Des Moines, where she had an exciting job as a secretary at Iowa Bell Telephone, and Dad was then at a student at Still College of Osteopathy in Des Moines. That's where they met.
Oh, interesting. And what did you learn in school that ultimately inspired the researcher and scholar you've become?
Wow. That question is not easy for me to answer. I did not at that time have any inkling that my career would involve trying to understand classroom learning. So I assume, like everyone, I draw on my mass of experience has shaped the way I think about things. But I have not really thought about the question of how my own childhood experience shaped my current perceptions, or even my perceptions at an earlier age, though I'm sure it did.
Sure. What did you want to be when you grew up? Do you recall?
The first inkling I have about what I might want to be was in a high school social studies class where we were supposed to write an essay about what we wanted to be. And I'm surprised looking back, but I said I wanted to be a college professor.
Is that right?
And so it turned out.
That's exactly what you did. Were you a good student in school? How would you describe yourself?
Very good.
Studious?
Not so studious, but successful.
Okay.
Look, it's a little small town high school.
Oh, sure. Sure. And tell us about your family now.
Oh, I have my wife, Jana. We're, of course, have been empty nesters for decades. We have a blended family, and altogether 6 children and their spouses. So it's a large family. So we have 12 sons-in-law, daughters-in-law, 11 grandchildren, a couple of great-grandchildren.
Oh, goodness. That's quite a family. And do you see each other often in Wisconsin? Is that correct?
Yes, that would be the favorite family meeting place. And every so often, all or almost all of us get together. But in a normal year, people are coming and going.
Oh, sure. Okay, becoming Dr. Anderson. Tell us about your experience as an undergraduate student.
All right, well, I went from my little small town high school I'll back up a minute. I went down to the little public library in a bungalow that had been converted to a library, and I got out the then extant version of Lovejoy's College Guide, and I looked through it, and it was clear to me that statistically speaking, Harvard was our best university. So it was actually the only place I applied.
Is that right?
Though I'm sure I could have gotten into other schools in the locality. And I was admitted. Indeed, I won a scholarship to Harvard. And I went off to Cambridge on the train. My mom and dad saw me off with a steamer trunk with all of my belongings. My first impression was I couldn't understand anyone. I couldn't understand ordinary people speaking a Boston or Cambridge accent. So I felt like I was in a foreign country. A second shocking impression was my first assignment in a course on social science was Max Weber in the original. And I read the first couple of paragraphs, and I didn't understand a thing I'd read. So Harvard was a tremendous shock to me. And I lost weight. I had failing grades in 2 courses at the end of my first semester. Fortunately, Harvard had a forgiving policy, especially for the kids they'd been recruiting in from the West and Midwest. They had made a deliberate decision to become a national university rather than a provincial university, taking in only the kids from the elite private schools in the East. And I was one of those. By the second semester, I was doing fine.
Is that right? And you ended up staying there for your other degrees.
I did.
And so what were the streams of interest in terms of your...
Well, I started out and finally settled in on American history as my undergraduate major. And it was a good major at Harvard at that time. If I'm not mistaken, every member of the history department in the field of American studies was a Pulitzer Prize winner.
Is that right?
It included Arthur Schlesinger, Senior, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a man named Paul Buck, who wrote about the South, a really great intellectual and teacher, though he was a shy man, named Oscar Hanlon, whose specialty was the influence of immigrants on the United States. And he wrote his Pulitzer Prize winning book was called The Uprooted. And it would be well worth reading today, given our debates about immigration. At any rate, I majored in American history. I wrote my undergraduate honors thesis on the abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison.
Really? Interesting.
Then when I fished around for what I wanted to do, I tried on several ideas. Maybe I'll be a lawyer. Many of my friends were going into law. I was a member of the debate team, and it seems most of my debate partners were going to law school.
That makes sense.
But I settled in on becoming a teacher, and I did. I went to got a Master of Arts in Teaching degree at a Harvard Graduate School of Education, went out and taught in both the junior high and senior high in Concord, Massachusetts.
And were you teaching social studies then?
I was in junior high. I taught social studies, and when I taught in the high school, it was history.
How many years did you teach?
Just a few years, 3 years.
Okay, and you were also a school administrator, is that correct?
I was. I backed into that job later. I almost as soon as I started teaching, the first thing that hit me between the eyes is there was really no systematic knowledge about teaching. Everyone had their ideas, but one set of ideas could not be supported over another. Mm-hmm. So I started back to school, to graduate school. I already had started a family. I got married after my junior year in college. Okay. And so with 2 little kids at home, I taught school during the day and then drove in my 1947 Studebaker, one of those cars you couldn't tell whether it was coming or going, to HGSE in the evening.
And so back at Harvard, you got an EDD.
I did.
And what did you study for your dissertation?
I did an unimportant and uninspired study of achievement motivation.
Your first and last, right? Of achievement motivation, go ahead.
Yes, it was about filling out the dimension. Not only was there the positive aspiration for success, but a sum of achievement motivation was fear of failure. That's what my dissertation was about. Not a memorable piece of work, but it gave me some practice, I guess.
So you said something prior about being a teacher and realizing that there was not information about pedagogy, what we now know as pedagogy.
No systematic.
So did that influence who you are today, that experience as well?
Yes, I'm sure.
Okay, how do you think that influenced you in terms of your scholarship today?
Well, you try as a teacher to gauge the influence of things you try, and you learn to be pleased when kids are attentive and involved, and you learn to try to figure out what's going wrong when that's not happening.
Sure.
So it's the same wellspring of experience that gives rise to the ideas that a research scholar might have.
Including the ideas that we'll talk about in a second. Okay, tell us about your first academic position.
My first academic position was at New York University. I didn't have a PhD yet. I was desperate to get out of school and start earning an income because I already had a family. And so I found a job at New York University on a project investigating something called the Dual Progress Plan. Fooling around with school organization was popular by educational reformers in the 60s. So this was a teacher specialization and non-graded grouping in the elementary school was what this project was about. And I got a job there. We moved to New York City, a tremendous shock. I hadn't lived with my family even in Cambridge. We'd lived out near Concord. Now we have to live in New York City. And my salary seems so spectacular, $7,000 a year.
Is that right?
Yes, twice what I was making as a school teacher.
Oh my goodness.
I was making $3,500. So I got to NYU for the visit I had, where I then agreed to come. And after agreeing that I would come to NYU, I went out to some nice-looking new apartment buildings right across the street. The rent was going to be $700 a month. Well, you can't spend $700 a month when your total income is $7,000.
You got 10 months salary, or you got 10 months rent paid.
So I ended up over an hour away from NYU, out in Flushing, Queens, and rode the subway on.
So when did you finish your EDD then?
I finished it in 60. I left Harvard in 59.
Oh, okay, okay. And then what brought you to the University of Illinois?
It's even more complications. I left NYU after 1 year, dreadfully unhappy with the life, the living circumstances, and I had come to believe the project was quite silly and was distracting teachers from teaching this organizational stuff, that we had to get into the core of teaching and learning. Otherwise, if anything, we were interfering with education rather than assisting teachers and children. So I went out. I met a guy who also worked on this project, who took a job as superintendent in East Brunswick, New Jersey. And he invited me to be an assistant superintendent, even though I wasn't qualified for that line according to New Jersey education regulations. So I did manage to qualify as a social studies teacher.
Oh, okay.
And I did the work of an assistant superintendent.
With the title of a social studies teacher. And then, then a position came open at University of Illinois?
Then 3 years went by. That was a good 3 years for me. But I really didn't see, I saw that as something temporary, even though I'd spent more time at that than at anything I'd done up until that point.
Okay.
But we had a bitter board election. The communities were growing very rapidly with huge housing tracts, and there were tensions between old-timers and newcomers, and we had a board election over that kind of issue. And the good guys won, but barely, and my mentor and guardian, I didn't have much standing without him, left. So I said, this is my time to get out.
Because you knew that you wanted to be an academic this whole time. Okay.
And I managed to get a job at Illinois, a soft money, 12-month, one-time job. That's it, a 1-year contract.
As a researcher, or?
It was as a organizer of a National Defense Education Act doctoral program.
Okay, okay. So how did you get into the tenure track then from there?
Well, I did well.
You did well. And somebody recognized that and offered you the tenure track position.